August the 1st, and we are privileged to have our archivist and our griot, Roddy Brown, who knows everything and helps us keep our memories. I wonder, I want you to talk as freely as you like, but I wonder if you could tell me anything about Abram Brown.
Well, as I recollect, he was a Brown, and my mind goes back to Watson. I hope you're referring to Watson Brown.
Okay.
He is the great-great-granddaddy. My great-great-granddaddy.
Right.
The gentleman that I knew back in the early 40s used to come to my grandmother's house, stood about 6'2", dark-skinned and tall gentleman that was able to, wasn't talking that much because he was about 100 years of age. And the reason why I know this, my grandmother, Ellen Brown's wife, and I was 5 years old, and my house was right next to my grandparents, and I was over there every day. And he would come by and get up and get her canned fruits because he was so tall, and she had the fruits, canned vegetables on the upper cabinets, and he could just reach up. He was elderly gentleman, but he could, and he fed on that, and she didn't like that. But anyway, he talked in a murmuring tone, and he wasn't very clear, but he could move. Didn't have a walking stick, but he was quite a gentleman, and I remember him very well. And so
his wife was Louise, and she was your great-great-grandmother.
Grandmother, yeah.
And tell me what he did around here.
Watson
Brown
was one of the few men that came out of the post-slavery period. He was 12 years old when my grandmother related that to me. She knew the history quite well. And my grandfather, when slavery ended in, 1866,
Mr. Lincoln's proclamation said 1863.
But
people didn't tell it until June. So
as in the Texas case. But anyway, he was lucky enough to acquire carpentry skills, and they had him working around the plantation. He came out of the Brook Green section. You've heard of Sandy Allen.
I have, yeah.
And you've heard of Anna Huntington.
Yes.
Well, you see, he was helped with that establishment. All the slaves who inhabited that area after slavery in the late 1800s. He was born, I looked at his headstone, 1849. So that would be right on target about the 12-year period I was telling you about.
Do we know where his grave is?
Grave was over at Holy Cross gravesite, but after Hurricane Hugo, many of those headstones got displaced. And we have that wall there in the new development, and I'm afraid that some of that was unearthed or disrupted.
Right.
I was over there about 2 years ago, and I had difficulty. My grandfather's headstone, my grandmother, but a lot of them are missing. But I can't dwell on that but I do remember we used to go there quite frequently. Every time there was a funeral service and a loved one was funeralized, the Brown families would be over there gave us an opportunity to come together. And this happened in the 40s. I can remember that as far as the first grade or well beyond before that. But anyway, moving on.
And that was Father Forsyth was the priest.
Father Forsyth was the priest.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only priest I remember. And he came here in 1926, I believe.
We had it
thereabout.
on here, yeah.
And so, but I remember him. He was my only priest, until I got. Well, he served up until 1973.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have some great pictures of him with a cigar.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's from Essex, Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah. He and I went to many conventions, and Ms. Forsyth, I know his son, Burns Forsyth. Yeah. And so we were very fortunate to have a minister to service for many years. Miss Ruby Middleton Forsyth, the wife, she's very dedicated. You know her history.
Yeah, although you know more.
She's in Who's Who, and she served. My fourth grade teacher, he taught me in the fifth grade. And so I remember those years.
And then did the school run through the 7th grade?
At that time, I think it was 7th or 8th.
And
I left here in 1951, but and I was in the middle school, well, 5th, 6th grade. But I think it ran to, 7th or 8th.
And did you go to Howard thereafter?
I didn't go to Howard. I moved to Myrtle Beach in 1951. I went to the Carver Training School there under a man by the name of Robert Burridge. We call him Professor. He was formerly from Georgetown, taught there, moved to Myrtle Beach in 1949, I believe, and he was the headmaster, principal, whatever, at that school. He and his wife, they came from Howard High School. And but I didn't go. My brothers, I had 2 brothers who went to Howard, but I didn't go there.
So Colbert.
Colbert and Clint. Clint, the younger one, he's dead. And I have a twin brother, he's dead. But
where'd you go after the training school?
after the training school, I went to Whittemore High School there in Conway.
Right.
We were bused for 4 years. You know, this was during the segregation period, and I went there, graduated from Whittemore under the principal there, Ernest Finney. Used to be a college there, but he started there in 1954, I believe, 55. And his son was a lawyer. He taught there too. He taught me. Well, in fact, both of them.
And then what did you do after high school?
I didn't. For a couple of years, I worked under a man by the name of Clay Britton. I helped him at a place, a hotel, one of the old hotels, the Chesterfield Inn. No longer there.
I know it well.
But I know the Brittons and the Chapmans out of Chesterfield, South Carolina. I worked for them for 10 years. And I went to a college in Sumter, South Carolina, Morris College, under O.R. Rubin. He was president. After that, went to USC I did some studies at Benedict College, South Carolina State. Started graduate work there way back in the early 70s, I believe. Finished up at Coastal back in 1975, I believe. Finished my graduate studies there. Dr. Johnson was the...
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, he was...
And it was, this is before they had dormitories and there were...
Oh yeah, that's the...
Was the Singleton building there?
Singleton building was there, as I remember, yes.
I made
so many new buildings now, but
I can't.
I do remember. And I think there was a small gymnasium or a small building we would go to and for registration, whatever.
I gave a speech at Coastal in 1974.
Okay,
and, I was a
the
graduate
year before. You were a graduate student there?
at Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And we had a meeting, and my wife said something like, "I wonder if you'll ever teach here." And I said, "I don't know where. There just seem to be pine trees." You know? Yeah.
Well, most of the professors that taught me, they were coming with USC from Columbia. They would come during Wednesday. We'd have, and Fridays, I believe, they would have the classes so structured that we would come in twice a week, and you could take what I took 12 hours during the fall, and it took me about a year and a half. Because see, I took courses at SC State before I came there. I got credit.
Are these education courses?
Education courses, yeah.
And then, tell me a little more about, I knew the Chesterfield Inn, and we knew Clay Britton. And I remember some of the people that worked there. There was a man named Mr. Boykin.
Oh yeah, Mr. Boykins and I, he was one of the waiters that worked with me several years. He was from Marion or Mullins. I don't know if he's alive now.
I was going to ask you if he might be.
Beg your pardon?
He had a marvelous singing voice.
Oh yeah.
And was he a minister? I think it was a...
I don't know. I know possibly, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. He was, of course I was very little, but he
Were
was
you?
very, very impressive.
Okay.
And then there was another one named Green, Mr. Green.
Oh yes, Irvin and I worked together for about 7 or 8 years. Yeah, he got us there back in the 50s. I started working there. My two brothers started, and they got me there. I used to run a little ice cream shop, and they didn't want to work there. We weren't making a whole lot of money. I took care of the high school kids. We serve ice cream, snow cones, hot dogs, candies, potato chips, all that stuff. And they left me with the little shop my father built after the war. And I ran it for, several years. And they needed someone to help at the Chesterfield Inn in the 50s. So I went down there and met Clay, and he and I got pretty close. And I worked with his wife, Pat, and I knew Bob Chapman, the Chapmans. I used to serve all of the children. I served them, helped them when they were very small. And Pat and Clay they were starting a young family, and they lived on the Pine Lake section. And I lived in the Carver, Booker T. Washington section. So many days, Clay's father used to pick me up, take me home, and he had a car and I didn't. And so we would walk to the Chesterfield Inn. I live right in the heart of town, so the Chesterfield Inn was just about, maybe a mile and 3/4. Now we would walk there many days. Had good guests from all over the Southeast, Virginia, North Carolina, New York, New Jersey, And most of those people I would serve for a couple of weeks. They start coming in. We would close down in December, no, November, 1st of November. And we clean up in January, and we open up in Canadian Week in February. So that went on for years. And our business would be booming, and the college students come down. Some of your students,
Yeah.
their spring break. We did it all back in the day. And keep in mind, the Seaside Inn was the first hotel on Myrtle Beach, and then you had the Ocean Forest Hotel,
Right.
which was opened in 1929, 30s, and the Burris and Chapin developers there, they developed all of that area. And so we in retrospect, we were able to build up that beach.
Yeah.
But
sure
most
did.
of the places there, when I moved to Myrtle Beach, there was, we didn't have, it was about a 4 or 5 months thing.
Mm-hmm.
The base was very instrumental in helping us. The Myrtle Beach Air Force 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron came there, opened up in 1956. They say 57, but the soldiers, I knew many of them were
And they were
made
there
friends.
56.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Army and the Air Force used to have maneuvers there back, and they would come in our community, and I would see many of the high school, when I was in high school, many of the guys, they were we would just get out of high school. Some of them would join the Air Force, and they were about my age, maybe a year or two. So I met many families because they didn't have enough room for them to stay on base. So we had some guest houses built by the Haywood family, and many of the Air Force young families would stay in my neighborhood. In fact, many of them stayed right next door to me. So this was long ago.
And were there some Holy Cross Faith Memorial people in the Booker T. Washington part of
My family, the Brown families, Philip Brown, Corbett Brown, my father, and we commuted all those years. We always, at least 3 or 4 Sundays out of the month, and we'd make it our business to be in church first and third Sundays for communion, and they had lay readers for the other 2 Sundays because Father Forsyth had to go to Georgetown. He had a church in Georgetown, so he was with us for 2 Sundays, communion Sundays, and then he would serve those St. Cyprian's in Georgetown, 2nd and 4th Sundays.
Right.
And that went on for years, as far as I can remember.
You were a lay reader, weren't you?
Yes.
When did you become a lay reader?
Well, that was back in 1959 or 60, 1960.
So who was
And the lay reader function in those days, we would just read either the first or second lesson. You studied, be sure you could pronounce the words, and then you had another lay reader that come behind you. So we were high school students, or high school students. My twin brother did it, and I did it, and I don't believe Corbett ever did. He left Myrtle Beach. He was in the Army. My other 2 brothers, they were in United States Army, and so.
Who was, you were confirmed by the bishop, right?
Yeah, Bishop Carruthers.
Carruthers, okay.
Yeah.
And Father Forsyth prepared you for the
Oh
conference?
yes, yes.
Did you feel like you got you well prepared?
Oh yes, we did our preparation for a few months, and we did the catechism and all of the creed and everything. We were very, I went to school here.
That's to say
a Christian school. Order of service, we knew everything. I'm an Episcopalian.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Double dipped and
Oh, yeah.
cradled. Yeah. Me too. Of course, I was up country.
Oh,
I
yes.
was up country.
Now, we had our convention back in 1953. We I believe the integration for the Episcopal Church came in the 60s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
We started integrating with the conventions in Charleston.
Yeah.
I took Reverend Forsyth there in my car. He and I would travel, and we started. But I believe officially, as I can best remember, this thing started back in '53, when they actually started merging.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I've got a little book
got some
by Bishop Thomas,
yeah.
who describes, of course, he says, this is Bishop, that they were never segregated. Of course, that's wrong. But he says that there was an archdeaconry,
Yes.
and the first one was Erasmus Baskerville.
Yes.
And so they were never completely separate like the Methodists,
No.
but that he called them colored or Negro,
Yes.
could not meet with the white.
Right.
So they'd have a separate archdeacon convention.
Oh, yes.
And then Bishop Thomas, I think, insisted they be integrated.
Right.
And I think they may still have sat separately, but you were
Right.
in one building.
Well, let me say this about this Paulus Island community.
Yes.
We were never segregated as such.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather and my great-great-grandfather were very privileged to know good people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me relate this story, and I know time is
No,
approaching. My grandfather, Allen Brown, worked at the mill there, wood mill, sawmill, whatever you want to call it, at the Hagley's plantation. And they gave he knew a man from Columbia, South Carolina. His name was Claude. He gave him privilege to operate a beachfront pier. You know where Ford's Road is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you go beyond Ford Road, you have a huge development there. But back in the 40s, my grandfather was a good carpenter, built a pier. Mm-hmm. My brother Colbert used to help him, and my cousins, and they would get the pine trees and the tall, straight ones. Mm-hmm. And when the tides came in, they would sharpen the edge, and they would build the pier with the wood he got from that wood factory, that sawmill. And they built the pier, and when I was young, 5 years old, that pier extended for about 120 feet across the creek. You know where the creek is?
Right.
There are houses over there. But long, long ago, there were no houses.
Right.
And we could walk right to the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
We could go through the dunes right on into the ocean.
And that was at Magnolia Beach?
Well, out of the names you're referring to, there were no.
There were no. Okay.
No, we didn't call it that. Allen Brown Pier, he would charge 5 cents. But the people from Columbia, Mr. Claude and all of his friends, I would have to come and help my grandfather with the crab lines. They loved the crab and had fishing nets, whatever. And he operated that for many, many years. And Mr. Claude gave him permission to run that. But it was his land, that beachfront property. And after he died in 1953, it went back to the family out of Columbia. And I know they sold all that property. Mm-hmm. It's worth millions now, you know, waterfront property. Yeah. But Allen Brown was in charge from that creek, about 10, 15 acres going either way. Mm-hmm. And you don't know, there was another beach called McKenzie Beach. Mm-hmm. Black man by the name of Frank McKenzie had a beach there and a little pavilion. He built the pier too. Now his operation was that he had a restaurant there, and he built a motel there you've heard of the...
Yeah, it's still there, isn't it? It's
the remnants of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1954, Hazel washed him out, destroyed everything. But my grandfather and Mr. McKenzie were the only two black men of business. I say business because people used to come to the pier from Charleston, Sumter, Columbia, and they would come to my grandfather's pier, and I would help with the crab lines and everything. I was very young. This is before school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did Mr. McKenzie go to this church, or did he?
No. McKenzie, he was
Over at Mount Zion?
Baptist, possibly. You know, I never did know where he came from. I mean, you know, I remember him very well. He was a good friend of my father, but my grandfather knew him. But he ran a business. He had what you called in those days a juke joint. Where you have the piccolo and little pavilion, the people would dance. And my grandfather's pier was a little longer than his pier. So, and they didn't come to his pier to fish or to crab. The crabs were very, it was a big thing to catch. Dozens of crabs. People would come and they loved fish, spot fish. You could fish off my grandfather's pier. And the people from Columbia and Sumter and all those places inland, they loved to come there because we would help them. And my grandfather knew a lot of important people out of Columbia. Mr. Claude was a millionaire. I mean, he operated. He said, Alan, you run this. So he was a good man. So we always had a good connection with the whites and blacks got along well. Even the highway patrolman used to come to my uncle's store. My uncle by the name was Isaac Brown. He ran a store right off 17, Nathan's father. He's my great uncle. And so we had people there from, we always had a good mixture of people, all races. I met Mr. Weaver there. He was a World War II veteran, raised his family right next door. And so we never had segregation as such. I ran into that when I ran into Myrtle Beach.
Right.
But we had good people, friendly people, got along well. We had no conflicts.
That's good. The kids that went to Holy Cross Parochial School.
Oh yes.
Did most of them end up leaving the area?
Well, after high school, many of them. In those days, we didn't have many opportunities, didn't have hotels, waterfronts.
Right.
After they left Howard High School, many of them went to New York, New Jersey, for better jobs. They had relatives there, and they went to New York. Most of my classmates, I have a friend now who's living in New York. He's been there for 60 years. He started in a business there, and so many of his families, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Connecticut, New York were the states that these blacks migrated to.
Did you know the Jenkins?
The Jenkins were that's one family that left to Washington, D.C. And many of them had homes in New Jersey too. They had relatives up there. I grew up, they were my neighbors.
Yeah. On Ford?
Ford. The Fords were not too many. They were always like the Browns. Many of them stayed in the Paulus Island. Joe Ford was the father of Joanne's father. Then you had Jerome Ford, one of the brothers. But they didn't go to, as far as I can remember, after high school, they stayed around. Paulus worked, whatever. In fact, Joanne used to help Mr. Lashcott. She helped with a little store there at Lashcott. Whatever they called it, the restaurant, whatever. His brother started his little business, but most of my classmates went out of state for jobs, maybe, but they would always come back on holidays.
And then the Jenkins actually returned here.
Oh yes.
After their
Vernon, but there's James and Cedric, they left. They joined the military. most of them, many of them, like my brothers, they either went to the Army or the Air Force. And from there, that's provided an opportunity for them to travel. A few of them went to the Navy, see the world, whatever, and they got a chance to, with the GI Bill, many of them got, further education, trades, whatever. So it was a good thing.
Oh, yeah. Did they have the benefit for college, or did that come?
Many of them pursued that avenue. Most of those fellas, as I remembered, they got jobs up there.
Mm-hmm.
Took advantage of the trade schools. You could.
Yeah.
Because my father, after he got out of the Army in 1945, he went to the trade school. He took up carpentry, but he was a businessman. He started his own cab business on Myrtle Beach, and so they all got in. Most of the Browns were business people. My grandfather, grandmother, uncles, and all of them had a trade. Carpentry was the main thing, but Nathan did a lot of that. You've heard of him. He was a judge here, but he built many homes. My cousin and Philip, of course, law enforcement. Right. And all those people had businesses.
I've got a tape of Nathan and Johanna talking to Father Tipton.
Yeah. Nathan had a lucrative business with construction, but he had a restaurant too, and sold a good piece of property there.
Yeah, he owned real estate, didn't he?
Oh yes, but now his brother Buxton had a filling station there. Levi, he had a business there in Conway, and so they all were business people.
Yeah, and you had to travel around. You got people in Conway and Myrtle Beach.
Yeah.
Georgetown.
Oh yeah. Gasoline was cheap.
Right. Yes. Well, that changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Father Forsyth passed on,
yeah,
who came in?
We had a man from Charleston area. Don't remember his name now, but a younger priest. We had supply priests coming in. We must have had about 7 or 8 supply priests. Oh, I could name them, Father Vandrew, and had a gentleman from England. I can't think of all of the names, but if we look on this list
here,
Tony Campbell served us longer than any of them. He was a young minister. Well, he got out of the Navy and got into the Episcopal, was trained. He was appointed our priest back in the 80s, I believe. But in between that span of 1974 and 1984, we had about 5 or 6 supply priests. They would come in, stay a year. They would serve someone else, at least 2 Sundays. Then we'd had lay readers coming in.
And were they also serving St. Cyprian's?
Some of them did. Yeah, some of them did. Not all of them, but we had supply priests for over 10 years.
And you were lay reader in those times?
Yes. Well, not only, there was another man ahead of me, Herman Brown, not related to me, but another family. He was, I worked under him. And so we held it down for well over 15 years, maybe more. But Father Campbell came in 1984. And so he served us for many years.
Tell me about him.
Well, he was a young man. He got out of the Navy and got trained in the Episcopal. Well, he was a minister, of course. He started many projects. St. Elizabeth is credited to under him, and a lot of the outreach programs. He had a lot of those because he was a young man. And
did he get the swimming pool built?
Yeah, well, he possibly started it, but Father Tipton was there too. After Tony left, Father Tipton came in.
Now, where St. Elizabeth's is, didn't your father own that land?
My grandfather, Allen Brown, sold that property to the Episcopal Church. And that deal was finalized in 1985 or 86 under Tony Campbell. So they made many trips up to Maryland because I had relatives and had to get in Florida, and they all had to agree with it and signed off on it because it was heirs' property. So they just sold that to the Episcopal Church.
Was the Baskerville Ministries already a concern when Father Campbell was here? Was Baskerville Ministry outreach?
Oh yes, that was already intact. I mean,
and the Smith Clinic, Catholic.
The Smith Clinic was not, maybe in its infancy, but we didn't have We've had people here to serve us in many capacities. We had a lady by the name of Miss Irvin, used to do the music for many years, and we had the way the Reverend Forsythe and Miss Forsythe had volunteers to come in and do a lot of things here. We had a lunch program, a food program. We had a lot of other programs. And so it was a network of programs to aid the community. The Episcopal Church was always about serving other people, outreach. We used to come and get clothes and food and you name it. They would come. I can remember we had the camp. The Forsythes ran that. And we had a man a minister out of Charleston who would head that. Mackey, I can't remember that man's name. Reverend. It's been a long time now, but they would have our camp from starting in the second week, I believe in June. The children would come from Sumter, Columbia, and they would have camp for 2 weeks every year. My brother was in the camp. I was never in it, but they had activities take them swimming in there were many activities they could do. Disadvantaged kids would really be a part of our program.
The building that used to be right over here, was that part of the camp?
Yes. Yes. They tore down most of those buildings.
I remember
being
you
probably saw maybe one or two, but there were three buildings, and they had we call it a lunchroom, but where the food was served. But those buildings were torn down many times. I mean, way back in the 80s, they started renovating and excavating, whatever, getting new buildings.
Now, Father Campbell really emphasized community outreach, serving. And
he was big on that, yeah.
And then when Father Tipton came, he felt we should focus more on the service, the worship.
Yeah, well, he started this church program here, His vision was to see the old church was too small. And when he got to be the priest, and he is from Surfside Beach, and a lot of his people, we just didn't have, and he envisioned, I think it was 2005 when this new church was erected.
Right. When Father Tipton came to interview,
yes,
were you part of that?
Oh, no, I was not on that committee. I remember him, but Nathan perhaps was. And
Nathan remembers him saying, now, I'm probably going to bring a lot of white people in.
Yeah.
And if that starts, this won't really be a black church anymore.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with that? And Johanna Nathan said, "That's okay with us. We're not prejudiced."
Well, let me say this. We've had white, even back as far as I can remember, we've had people from All Saints. We've had whites would come into our service faithfully, many of them over the years, long before Reverend Tipton came. They would come in, and we were just regular part. I knew many of them. Can't remember all of them now, but we've always had an integrated crew, if you want to.
If you want to put it
With
that way.
Miss Irvin served with the
Yeah.
music, and she was white, and so we've always had that chemistry of integration. That was never a point of reference for anybody. No, just to say people got along, and you see, Paula's Island was always a place of recreation. You got the beachfront, and so like you have visitors here today from other parts of the Carolinas, and we would have that back in the day. They would come in, other Episcopalians, as far as I can remember.
That's seems to be what
A unique place.
And you said Nathan was a judge, was it?
Oh yes, Nathan was he was a contractor. He was appointed a judge of Georgetown, Paula's Island area back in I think it was 1971 or 72. He served about 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer. Yeah, I remember him very well, Judge Brown. I knew him as my cousin Nathan. But yes, he served this area. And he had his court was held in his courtroom in his building. Yeah, he would. But since I was not living here, I never got to serve jury duty under him.
Tell me a little more about the Booker T. Washington community.
The Booker T. Washington community is a community in Myrtle Beach, which consists of several streets there, and Carver, Dunbar, Hemingway. Not the race path, but the Canal Street section we call Holland. I live right off 21st Avenue, right near the convention center. I'm in that section, right in the heart of town. But the Booker T. Washington community encompasses all of that area. Blacks, principally, mainly blacks. And they settled that area back in the 20s and 30s, where they began to Myrtle Beach under the Burris brothers and Chapin, Burris and Chapin. They had a lot of blacks to do the work, the hotels, the streets, and all of that. And so Carver Street was the first street that you got Oak Street going toward the ocean now. Some blacks lived on Oak Street, but then we all settled on Carver Street. That was the main street with the main business there under a man called Charlie Fitzgerald, Charlie's place there now, but a lot of blacks lived there. I lived on Carver Street. I was his neighbor, and he was perhaps the renowned business person there at that time. He came to Myrtle Beach in 1937. His wife told Sarah, they were my neighbors, so but they all died. He died in 54. She's dead now. So all those people, when I came to Myrtle Beach back in the 40s, my daddy owned a business, a cab business then. They were there, used to go to his place. So this was a thriving community because we were segregated and the blacks had no other, they would work the hotels and motels, but they would come, they couldn't use the beach, they couldn't frequent. But now many of the whites would come over to our businesses there because they were very much interested in that type of music in that era.
Yeah.
You hear that rock and roll music out of Buckley's in Tennessee, and the performers would come every 2-3 weeks. We had Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, all those people were there. And all the bands, the blues bands, the rock and roll. I'm privileged to see all of that. Dominoes, the Wilsons, and all those fellows were there. But they would come on what we call the Chitlin Strut. Every 2 weeks, you'd have a big band. The posters would come from Georgetown to Wilmington And all of the blacks, many of the whites from the hotels would come to Charlie's place to hear these people, Little Richard and all those guys, all the black music, that genre. And so there was a great demand for that on the radio. Mm-hmm. And so when they heard those people on the radio, they wanted to hear the live music. Charlie capitalized on that. That was his, that made his business. For many, after he died, his wife carried on that business. And the last show she had was in 1969. Fall of 69 was the last show that I can remember, and I was there, that they had. And so, but we had integration long before that.
Yeah. We got white people coming to the black.
Oh yeah, black businesses. Even my father's place. Yeah.
But they won't let the black people come to the white business.
Well, that's a little story behind. Charlie always went to the. He was a man of. He had friends.
Right.
They were not necessarily from the South.
Right.
But he went frequent those days. He took the little few of the black fellas to those businesses back, and they would eat breakfast, and they knew Charlie. Charlie would go there. So, yes, he had that privilege, but the whites would always, they would come to the businesses in my neighborhood now.
Yeah.
Long before the uprising we had in 1950, you probably read about that.
About the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah, I remember the night that happened.
Tell me about that.
Well, I wasn't on the beach there. That's 1950. I came in 51. But my uncle, Ed Washington, was the man who rescued Charlie after they busted up his joint or his business. Mm-hmm. It was a frightening thing, you know. They had their objective, and you know they wanted to stop this, but there was no stopping them.
They couldn't stop.
No,
that's the final.
Even after he left for a few months and came back, but they were coming long before then. And even in my day, I used to see the whites coming over to and there were many of them. I mean, you had thousands of people coming to hear those stars, whites and blacks. And the reason why I know they would come in with the Cadillacs and big cars, he had a special balcony, a special place. Waiters would serve them, and they would dance on the floors and all, dance floors. So this thing was, it was something that was a natural, that they couldn't stop it.
Yeah. You knew Charles Joyner.
Beg pardon?
Charles Joyner.
Yeah, I heard, yeah.
He gave a speech in Atlanta about Charlie's place.
Yeah, I knew Mr. Charlie, met him several times. He had a young son, and his wife used to ask us, you all babysit. He was right next door, he's my neighbor. Charlie was my neighbor. We call him Mr. Charlie.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, you've been
Charlie Fitzgerald.
You've been mighty kind of
Oh yes, he was helped a lot of people, had people working for him. Yeah. Did a lot for the economy and for Myrtle Beach. In many ways, he had businesses spread all over the place. And he had some good white friends to work with him. Cab business, you name it, restaurant. But that was long ago, back in the 40s and 50s. Life was different. People, you had a different perspective on things. I know you, Jack, you told me about this book you're writing about the post-Reconstruction era. And so we were in a great transition period of culture.
Right.
You hear so much about culture wars and all this, but we had a merging of the culture, the good, a little of the bad, very little ugly thing. You know, we were related back to the 1950s, but that was an aberration. That was never a great threat. It was more born out of ignorance and stupidity, if I could tag it, because they didn't accomplish anything.
No,
In fact, he even had a man to die in that melee that they had that night, which was awful.
Yeah.
And so people getting into that, they didn't know. And so it teaches us that love is stronger than hate.
It is.
And we need to come together. See, when we practice religion, I'm an Episcopalian, you're an Episcopalian, and when we practice this thing that God has given us in His holy word, we've got to understand that He wants us to be together. He's never been about segregation.
Yeah, you won't find it with Jesus.
Yeah. The Jesus message and the message of the cross and His message of what we should be practicing as a people in this country. We got to get back to what Jesus teach. Because see, we divided Democrats, Republicans, and all this. That government will fade. I mean, the scripture says that will never last.
Yeah.
Communism, Marxism, all of that will diminish. These are man-made constructs. I mean, in your mind. I mean, that's never the divine plan. Divine plan is for unity. Love. Capstone of the whole thing is love. And if you have that, then you don't have a problem with different people. I don't care if you're Chinese, Russian, whatever. You got to learn to look at people from within, from without. I mean, and love is the thing. And that means concern for you. I want the best for you, and I want the best. I want to treat you just like I want to be treated.
Yeah. Well, you always have.
Yeah. And if you do that, then you fulfill the greatest laws. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. But we have, as a society and as a world, we can't seem to do this. Government, you can't legislate love.
No.
We try, and the governments are far from it. The communists was never able to look at this mess we got in Cuba. You're always going to have an unrest when you don't operate in God's law. And the world is going down the tubes. Unless we get back, and the churches have tried it with good intentions, but we've not accomplished that. Only Jesus can do that.
Only Jesus. Well, that's probably a good place to end for today. Yeah. That's a good one to end.
Well, Jack, it's been a pleasure, and I'll pick you up. You can pick me up on any other thing. I didn't tell you the full story about the Ellen Brown story and all of that. Now, there were two other gentlemen that were very instrumental in the Paulus Island Walking on Neck. Ben Ory, he's in that book called Down by the Riverside.
Yeah.
And also Welcome Bees and Watson Brown, my great-great-grandfather. Now, those three people, I thought, and looking back in retrospect in history, were instrumental in coalescing this community. They were very powerful in impacted the community and influence on many people. Ben Ory was a slave, like my grandfather, and he made that transition. When you look at his story, well, he took that Gullah stuff. I don't know if you can understand him, but he told stories and things, but I'm going to leave that for the research.
Okay.
But I don't want to get into that. But my uncle told me about him. He's dead now. He died in Baltimore, Maryland in 1987, 88. And he was pretty near 100 years old, but he used to talk about Ben Ory. And he knew Ben Ory. He was born back in the 1800s, late 1800s. And Ben must have been a very influential. He knew my grandfather Watson. He left here and went to Philadelphia and New York back in the early 30s because he migrated because of the jobs weren't here.
Right.
and he worked along the stevedore or whatever ports, but he couldn't get a good job in South Carolina. But you know, he was very successful. He worked in a factory there in Baltimore, which he moved from Philadelphia, and had 2 apartment buildings and did quite well for himself. Didn't finish high school, could hardly read, but he was a good man. His name was Raleigh.
Roddy.
And David Raleigh, Hackless Raleigh, my great-grandfather, and his name was James Raleigh. Very good man. I will always remember him.
Is this Raleigh like the city in North Carolina?
Yeah.